Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay. The moon in Taurus is a very interesting placement because I have very few podcasts on the sign of Taurus. Because from my experience, I don't get a lot of people who have significant Taurian placements looking for insight into astrology or natal chart synthesis. And there's a reason why. The predominant nature of the Scorpio archetype when it comes to astrology is not a coincidence. And I've explained that before in some of my podcasts, that Scorpio is such an enigmatic sign because what it's really after is the true knowledge of how reality works. Because it is not reality that it is really after in terms of understanding. It is itself. So that it keeps digging into the nature of reality because what it really wants to understand is why existence. What is the nature of this reality? Where did it come from? Because Scorpio has a memory of some kind, of a reality beyond this one, that it used to exist in before it became physical. And that is what drives it, because it's an orgasmic type of reality. And it comes into this physical reality looking for that orgasmic experience, even though it doesn't know what it is most of the time. That is, prior to listening to these podcasts that I make. Okay? But that's Scorpio. Here we're going to be talking about Taurus. And Taurus is a very interesting natal sign because it's the second zodiac sign after Aries. And if you imagine Aries as the birth of something, then Taurus is the physical manifestation of that birth. Because the birth of awareness is basically just talking about the sense of beingness. Alright? Because obviously there is a time when the beingness isn't, and then there is a time when it is. Now, this is superficial because a being always is. But what Aries talks about is the entry into a different medium of being. That is, a different way for beingness to express itself. The different way that beingness expresses itself in this reality is the physical experience. Okay? So that's the process of being born. Now, but most children, when they're born, they don't know what they are. They don't even know that they are a body or they're a physical body. They don't know what physicality. They have no idea what these things are. Taurus is the beginning process when this idea of physicality begins to set in. And the first part of this is the acquisition of the sense of physicality, which is the acquisition through the senses, the material senses of your body. And that's what Taurus is really talking about. Now, the Taurian experience is typified by an initial search process that is very haphazard, very sporadic, and very chaotic. Alright? And it is the search and acquisition of intense material experiences. And the reason why Taurus is doing that is because it is searching for something. It is searching for a calibration, something to fix as a reference point in the sensorial world that it exists in. It wants to be able to acquire a sense of what is good for it, that is what is pleasurable, and a sense of what is unpleasurable or displeasurable, whichever way you want to call it. So you can imagine that this acquisition or this calibration and the search for a fixed frame of reference, which is a datum, really begins through the experimentation of Taurus with the sense organ of taste, the tongue. And so the sense of eating is the basic datum that all Taurians use to fix a reference point in the world of sensory experiences that they exist in. Every Taurian does this. Now, the ones who have significant placements in Taurus, the sense of taste is very well developed or impaired depending on the life story that the Tauran is engaged in. And if it is impaired, it means that this experience must now be searched for externally because initially it is denied. Or if it is not impaired, then finding that datum allows the individual to construct a world around their sensory experiences. So that the way that they're able to understand reality is through the acquisition of these sensorial experiences and the calibration of them, that is the filtering of them into what is pleasurable and what is not pleasurable. Now, the sense of pleasure is a very important thing in the human because it allows the human to create what I call a sensorial vector. Now, a vector is just an arrow that points in a particular direction. So that the sense of pleasure is what leads an individual towards understanding that which they like about physical reality. Now, you have to understand that there is no physical reality out there that the individual can experience objectively. So that the sense of this datum, the sense of this pleasure vector, right, really is a calibration within themselves, pointing to the relationship between what they perceive as reality and what they understand about the pleasurable aspect of that reality. How comfortable that reality makes them. That is the essence of that vector. And so when someone asks you what you like, it's a Taurian question. Because what you like is very unique for each and every individual. And once you understand what you like, then you begin to understand the process of acquiring that which you like. And if you don't know what you like, it means you don't know where you're going. Because life is a journey. And the journey really is towards that which you like, which you perceive as the comfortable solution for you, the place where you want to be. So where you have Taurus and Venus in your natal chart is where you are going, at least from a material point of view, in order to be able to confirm and validate the fact that you are human. Then everything builds upon that. The entirety of the zodiac is built on this Taurian function, because when it goes wrong in Taurus, everything else is bunk. Because imagine you don't know where you're going, then what's the point of just engaging in the journey? How do you know which direction is good for you? How do you know what is good for you? And so in the absence of that fixed reference frame and datum, which is what happens when Taurus or Venus is impaired in a natal chart, the individual begins to wonder. They begin to sample different types of physical experiences. And what they're really looking for is to understand which one resonates with them so deeply that it becomes an idea of what they want in life. But the problem is that it is much more complicated than that. It is not so easy. Because usually when this is impaired in the natal chart, this search function begins to point in so many directions. Now, if you don't know where you're going, then you would think that any road will tend to lead you there. And so what happens is that you waste your time experimenting with different sensations without arriving concretely at a very powerful notion of which one is the one that you like. Okay? That's how the impairment works. Now, when the moon finds itself in Taurus, the moon is a sense of self-acceptance. So usually where we find the moon is where we are trying to accept that aspect of ourselves. And usually the reason why there's a pressure to accept is because everything else is trying to make us not accept it. And so the moon in Taurus represents the urge to accept a reality system based on that Taurian function, meaning that you must know what you like. And so when the moon is in Taurus and the Taurian function, either through Venus or in Taurus itself, is impaired, then that moon begins to suffer because it can't find rest, because the moon represents the deepest parts of our nature, what we tend to interpret as emotional security. So when we do not feel emotionally secure, then we don't feel safe. And so when the moon is in Taurus and Taurus or Venus itself is impaired, then that moon feels out of sorts. It doesn't feel comfortable anywhere. It doesn't feel at home. And when it does that, it begins to enact defensive measures, because the moon is the essence of Cancer. And Cancer is a crab. And the interesting thing about the crab is that it has a shell, an exoskeleton, to protect it from the harsh realities of the world. And that's what you see when the moon is in Taurus and that Taurian function or the Venus associated with it is impaired. That's what you see. You see the shell that the moon has constructed to protect itself from vulnerabilities associated with material deprivations. And these defensive measures come in very many guises. You know, we humans, we are very adaptable creatures and we're very intelligent. We know how to create different types of behaviors to hide our vulnerabilities. But the one thing all vulnerabilities being hidden have in common is that your attempt to hide it makes it visible to a skilled investigator. That's really what it is. And that's why the tendency to hide things sometimes is really, it's almost childlike, because it is the fact that you are trying so hard to hide a particular aspect of your behavior that reveals it in essence, okay? And most times these things are very clearly stated in the natal chart. Especially something as important as the Venusian or Taurian function, which sits at the heart of what we consider to be material reality. Because when things begin to go wrong, the first sign of that is material deprivation. An individual that cannot fit into the material world. They can't make sense out of it. Okay? And they struggle because of that. That's why the Taurian function is a very, very important step in the building of the personality, which is exemplified by the completion of the 12 zodiac signs. The moon in Taurus is also symbolic of the conviction in Taurus, because the moon is the sense of conviction. That is, the moon represents the conviction that needs to be built. And the conviction is what emerges from the sense of self-acceptance. So when you say that the moon is in Taurus, what you're basically saying is that the conviction process of this individual is in Taurus. That means it is in the material world of sensations. And it is this which the individual now uses to acquire aspects of that material reality. Because remember, convictions create realities. Now, the same thing happens because you cannot chase any objective and actualize any objective if you don't have convictions. And the objectives are symbolized by the sun. Okay? And the moon's conviction is how that sun is actualized. So the moon in Taurus really is a statement regarding the material acquisitions that lead to the expression of the ego. So that the individual seeks to acquire material reality as part of their native self-expression. Now, when things begin to go wrong, the material acquisition itself fails, and so the ego cannot take off. So that these people they are waiting literally for that sense of abundance that moon in Taurus connotes, so that they can launch that ego. That leads to problems. And the problems are usually in the area of frustration, because apparently you can see the target, you can feel it, but you cannot acquire it. And that represents a very specific type of pain for the individual. So the moon in Taurus is also a statement about the influence of mother and the first sense of material satisfaction that the child had when the child was suckling from mother. And so in that placement is encoded that entire experience. Because like I told you, the first calibrative system that Taurians develop is the sense of taste. And around that sense of taste, they build everything else. Everything. Their entire worldview. So usually significant placements in Taurus that are not impaired, they love a good meal. And it's not the proliferation of the meal or the spread of the meal. No, it's the quality of the meal. They are drawn into rich foods, foods that have a certain quality about them. And there's something about rich foods and fat, proteins. I have an entire podcast about the biochemistry and the metabolism of life that is tied to the zodiac. But it's not something I'm going to release until later on this year. Because there's a lot to put down before that. Because, you should be able to look at your natal chart and deduce all your health concerns even before they occur. That's the truth. Okay? Because all of it is encoded there. Because your behavior comes from the response of a physical living body. It doesn't just come because the planets are this. Like I told you, there are no planets. There's nothing out there really. There's nothing. It's just you making up your narratives at a level of your being that projects a physical reality. And everything in that physical reality is being projected by that narrative from that point. Now, it's not a point that you can easily just access and twist whichever way you want. Okay? So if the child had not received a very good type of sensorial experience from the mother, this shows up in the natal chart when you have the moon in Taurus. Okay? It shows up as an impediment to that moon, even though that moon is in Taurus. So you have certain aspects that go to the moon and deprive it of something. Or they go to the moon, they enhance it. Because that's what you call the hard and the soft aspects. They are either deprivations or enhancements. Because what you're looking at as your entire natal chart is a very complex system. Like a sophisticated electronic system. But it's more sophisticated than any electronic system that you can imagine. Because you're dealing with the behavioral response of a living organism. Living organisms are the most complex things in existence. Alright? Not to talk of the kind of complexity that a human being really is. There's nothing more advanced than a human being. Nothing. There's no AI that's going to be invented tomorrow that's going to be more complex than a human being. A human being sits at the very cutting edge of what is physically realizable. So don't let anybody fool you, with all the nonsensical tropes that you hear of, putting AI and merging AI with a human being or putting a chip in a human being's head. These are nonsensical things. And they're coming from people who should know better, but they don't care about human beings. They never have. Otherwise, the world would be a very different place. So when all is working correctly, the moon in Taurus is a very instinctual notion of the sense of value. Because that's what Taurus really translates to when it gets to its higher echelons. It is a sense of value and a sense of the containerization of that value. That is how the value is packaged such that it is perceived as even higher. That's what the moon is talking about. So people who have the moon in Taurus, they have this perception of value that allows them to immediately assess what value something contains. So that the kind of relationships that they encourage are those with that type of perceived value in it. And so that leads us to the other side of the transaction. Why? Because when things are not well balanced, the individual becomes gluttonous in terms of the type of relationships they encourage, and the relationship they feel that they can get something from in terms of material reward. Taurus is not an external sign. It's still dealing with the individual. So when you think that the external of you in that sense, when it comes to relationships, can be a source of reward for you, then your value system isn't working correctly. And so when that is always in the natal chart, when it is interpreted like that in the natal, there are lessons tied to that. And that means that there are lessons tied to the Taurian archetype itself and to the sense of value. Usually it is indicated when the value system needs to be corrected. So the individual is forced to live that experience so as it can have a correction later, so that the individual can recalibrate and then come to their own sense of individual value, which now leads to their own success. That's how these things work. But more importantly, what the moon in Taurus allows one to do is to be able to plot this pathway forward, to sense it intuitively and instinctively, because that's the nature of the moon. To understand what is valuable to them, and then to be able to protect that which is valuable, to incubate it. And so it is advisable for people like this to have long-term focus on investments, because the moon is an incubator. Alright? And it is an internalization process. So when you perceive a sense of value that is individual to you, then you can incubate that sense of value for a long time while it is developing. Now, it is very important to understand that the sense of value itself is not usually very well developed when you identify it. And that is the essence of incubation. That is the essence of the moon in Taurus when it is functioning correctly. It is the ability to what? To pick something that is valuable even before people recognize that it is valuable. Now, when this goes too far, the individual becomes very, very closed-minded. They take no risks at all. Alright? When they identify something of value, they hold on to it in an obstinate way. They create an incubator for it, but they're not willing to allow that thing emerge from the incubator because they don't want to share it with anybody. As it is internalized so well that the individual becomes a literal stick in the mud. They don't want to evolve. They don't want to grow that thing. They just want it there as it is because it belongs to them. That is the extreme form of possessiveness. And it's hard to argue with these people out of that type of condition. Why? Because they are obstinate. That is the essence of Taurus. Taurus is when I find that which I want, I sit on it. And there is nothing that can make me move. That's the essence of Taurus. It's a very worldly, pleasurable type of sign. It's very enjoyable because you have to be able to enjoy life. Listen, the sensorial experience is a pleasurable experience. And it doesn't matter what the sense organ that's delivering it is. It could be the sound from your ears. It could be a visual experience, whatever it is. The very idea of it is that you should be able to understand the combinations of sensations that give you pleasure because they are unique to you. That's how you know who you are. And where your Venus is located, whichever sign it is located in, that is how you love to be loved. That's how you love to be pleasured. And that's what your soul will instinctively look for. It doesn't matter what you tell yourself. If you've gone astray, you have left that line. But there's a reason why your soul has chosen that particular thing, where that Venus placement is, and all the aspects of the Venus. It's because that is the best condition for it. Now, if you leave that and you go somewhere else, then you commit a sin against yourself. And the result of that is a correction. Meaning that you will now trigger certain life experiences that will now pull you back into that area if it is part of your life story. That's really what it is. And all of these are visible in your natal. They're visible as part of your life story. Like I said, if you don't know where you're going, which is that vector that points to a particular direction, then how do you know when you have even got there? So you might receive that which you like, but discard it because you still want to experiment. And then you lose that which is valuable to you, and you don't get it back. And that represents a different type of pain. You see, material deprivation is a very specific type of pain. Some people think it's only associated with money. No, it is the physical experience that you want the most that you simply cannot have. It also includes the sensation of sex. It could be someone that you really want, you really love, or you really care for, but you can't have the person. That is also part of a material deprivation. It could be hunger for a particular type of food that you cannot afford. And each of these deprivations represent a very specific type of pain. It could be a job that you really want. Now, it's not the job that you want, really. It's the pay or the prestige or whatever it is, whatever sensorial experience that is pleasurable attached to that job is what you're really after. And then you can't have it. That's a very different type of pain. It's very different when you don't know of such a thing and you don't know of its absence. But when the moon is in Taurus, you constantly feel this void, this gap. You feel like you can have more. You want more. Now, if things are not going well, you cannot have more. And when you try to manipulate the situations and the conditions to give you this more, they seem to backfire. That is, if that is part of the life story. Because the moon in Taurus is a very important statement about your value system. And usually there's much more encoded in the natal charts to support this placement. I have not seen placements like that don't have a backstory to them. Because the moon is said to be exalted in Taurus, meaning that it is accentuated in the sign of Taurus. And so that which you want more, you seem to want much more. And so when that is deprived, that's like increasing the appetite for something and then making sure that the individual doesn't have it. That's a very specific type of pain. Okay? And those who have experienced that probably know what I'm talking about. Alright? Now, like I've said, the moon in Taurus is especially fond of luxury. And it's not luxury per se, it is value. Now, some people have an impaired sense of value so that all sorts of junk appear valuable to them. Well, what is valuable to a person is valuable to a person. Alright? Some people have a very rich sense of value so that what they're really looking for is something that buttresses their own internal value assessment of themselves. Because the value that you get or that you seek has nothing to do with an external reality. Nothing at all. Because like I've told you so many times, there is no such thing. The value you're really looking for is how you identify yourself. Your sense of self-worth. And that is always tied to who you think you are. So that when things are wrong or things are going wrong, it is because who you think you are, the idea of that is impaired. Now, the idea is to find an accurate sense of self-worth. Because if you overinflate that sense, you run into problems. If you underinflate it, you run into problems. And that is the essence of the Taurian function. It's a vector. And in order to be able to narrow down this vector so that it points to precisely what indicates your sense of self-worth, you must experiment. You must sample. And so the early stages of all Taurians are sampling scenarios, so to speak. And they could be very hedonistic because they're sampling everything, both good and bad. And they're calibrating. That's what it means. They push some things away. They pull some things towards them. So they can be very promiscuous. But when they find that which they like and that which meets or matches their sense of self-value or their expectation of self-value, then they fix the reference there. And then they hold on because that's their nature. They're very loyal in that sense. They tend to hold on to that which they know and understand as value. Now, if a moon in Taurus person is breaking up with you or they're leaving you, it's because their value system either has not been properly calibrated so that they have chosen wrong or they are still searching. That's really what it is. Now, they're still searching because they haven't found, which could also mean because they don't know what it is. That's a deep problem also. Or they think they can do better, which means that they are still searching in that sense. So whichever way you look at it, that value system is still turning all over the place. And it's not about what is out there, it's about themselves. Meaning that the way that they see themselves, the story they're telling themselves about their own self-value has not been cemented yet. So you're dealing with people whose sense of self-worth is still wavering all over the place. Because a moon in Taurus person, once they have chosen you and once they have chosen to be with you, what you have are the makings of a very lifelong partner. As long as the original value system is not impaired. That's what it is. Because them being with you is an assessment of value, which they have conducted, because it's not an assessment of your value per se, it's an assessment of their own value. So if the assessment of their own value is wrong and they have underrated that sense of self-worth that they have, then they now see you as something they can do better than. They now believe that they can be with somebody much better than you, or vice versa. Okay? Now, one of the key problems with Moon in Taurus is knowing where this boundary condition should be, because boundary conditions are how we basically allocate value, how we preserve value. All right. If you take it to either extreme, it becomes nonsensical, because when you take it to the higher extremes, then the sense of value is restrictive. The individual becomes very selfish and very stingy and very possessive. And if you take it to the other extreme, the individual doesn't know how to create those boundaries. So they do not know how to create a sense of self-value. And they want to spread themselves as thinly as possible. They literally dissipate themselves till they fill up the entire space in any context they are in. And there's no human being who is capable of doing that. You'll exhaust yourself far quicker than you can fill up the space. And so the individuals tend to have nothing. You understand? And both are clearly written in the natal chart. And anytime those extremes are signified in the natal chart, there's a life experience connected to it. There's a learning strategy built within it because it's connected to other things. Now, being able to pin down the sense of self-value is something that under normal circumstances, very young children are able to do very early in life. But if it hasn't happened for you, then it means that it is part of a much broader story. So you shouldn't worry. Now, if you're confused, get a natal chart synthesis, not an analysis. Only synthesis can reveal that which is troubling that type of placement. Okay, because this has nothing really to do with just individual placement. It's a problem of interactivity and connection. Because that's how you exist as an individual. You have a tremendous amount of connections, all of them coming together as one. Okay? Very, very important. Now, depending on where you have Moon in Taurus in the natal chart, the statement there is that you are supposed to identify the sense of value in that area. So it depends on the house where you find this. Alright? And some people are very confused about this house system. I don't use whole houses. And the reason why I don't is because a human being is very complex. Because we're describing the behavioral response of a brain, of a mind. And it's very complex. People are more complex than they realize. And also, if you look at it correctly, then they can be simplified. But getting the complexity correct is a difficult thing in astrology. Why? Because when you use whole houses, for instance, you oversimplify the natal chart. You strip away the house information, and all you are left with is the sign placement of the planets and their interactive aspects. And you need minimum those 3 levels of information: the house, the sign placement, and the interactivity. It has to be a minimum of 3. And there's a reason why. You can only understand that in my natal chart synthesis classes, where I teach natal chart synthesis. Because when you get this complexity right, then the natal chart can sing to you. It can literally describe itself to you. And you see it right there in the natal chart. It jumps up at you as a complex system. That's the behavior of a complex system. From birth, as you grow up, as each of those functional lights, which you call planets, as they evolve in interaction with the other placements, they specify a behavioral response. So that as the individual moves from one environment to another, the responses change, but they change in units of natal placements. You cannot give what you don't have. So you can only respond in ways that you have been permitted to respond in. You know, there's something called black body radiation in physics. And the other name for it is cavity radiation. It is the signature of the response of a system towards radiation. So a system that absorbs radiation re-emits that radiation. The signature is that method of re-emission, because it is always unique to the system itself. That's why it's called a cavity radiation. So all cavities tend to respond in a particular way. And once you see that type of response, you know that you're looking at a black body. And there's a complete physical profile for radiating sources that have this black body spectral signature. And that is the same as your natal chart. There's a very specific response that you term human behavior, because it is coming from the human being's awareness of what they consider to be an external environment. So as that environment changes, the human being responds in units of its own behavior. That unit, the name of that unit in physics is a quanta. So you can imagine that natal chart synthesis, the understanding of it is the quantization of human behavior. Yeah, that's right. You heard it here first. There are a lot of firsts in these podcasts. There are a lot of firsts in my work, in my book. It's just not mainstream. And the reason why it's not mainstream is, It's the same problem that, it is what it is. But don't worry about that. At some point in time, it will be mainstream because that is the nature of my own life story. That's really what it is. It is not unusual for the moon in Taurus people to have very good singing voices, and listening to them speak or sing is also very good because like I said, the mouth, the taste, the tongue, these are the primary acquisition instruments for this sensorial reality that they construct. And they do this because they are able to taste the refinement in things. So you can usually spot this placement within an individual if it's very pronounced and not impaired. You can usually spot it by the way the person is particular about what they eat. Now, I'm not saying that they eat things from a health point of view. No, not necessarily. It's more from a tasteful point of view. They're very particular about the way that food tastes. All right? And that's one of the giveaway signs that this person might have a significant moon in Taurus placement. But most of the time, these things are concealed because of the mix. The moon in Taurus is also indicative of a family that has some type of wherewithal, in terms of resources and all that. Now, if this is not the case, then it is part of the narrative that shows that that moon in Taurus is uncomfortable in its placement. And that's not anything to worry about. Why? Because in order for you to acquire wealth, you must know what it feels like. You must have a hunger of some kind inside you for that wealth. Because the thing that allows us to acquire material things is because we really, really want them. And as long as we don't go overboard with this and become greedy, right, which is one of the downsides of this placement, then the individual is okay. Meaning their life story leads towards the acquisition of wealth. But when they get too greedy, then that's also a statement in the natal chart. There is an overexcitation of that moon in Taurus, leading it to make those types of mistakes. Now, it is possible that the acquisition will ultimately be successful after the initial calibrations have been adjusted. Okay? So that when you know what you want, and you want material things, that's the first step towards getting them. And as long as you avoid certain pitfalls in the acquisition of material things, you'll be fine. But most people think that they want money or they want wealth and all that. It's not true. The reality of it is that when you examine different types of natal charts, you see that most people don't want money. The only reason why they seem to want money is because money can get them to the things that they really want. But you see, the soul doesn't understand the language of money. Your soul, it's a very innocent and pristine creature. It doesn't understand that you need to acquire money in order to acquire something else. Because it doesn't know what money is. Money is not natural. Alright? So trying to redirect a soul that is geared towards having a comfortable, peaceful home, trying to re-engineer that soul to target money so that money can get it, that it doesn't work. The soul will just keep longing for that comfortable, peaceful home and then be worried as to why it cannot acquire it. Is because some people have put money in between yourself and that which you desire the most, forcing everybody's desire to coalesce around the struggle for money. And the reason why that has been done is so that they can control the entire population. Because if you don't have money, you really can't do anything. So that is like transforming a house that has 12 entrances, transforming it into only one entrance so that they can gatekeep that one entrance. So that if you don't do what they want, you cannot get into the building. You cannot get into the sensorial experiences as demanded by your natal chart if you don't go through that one door called money. And that creates a lot of dysfunctionality in the human. Because people end up doing all sorts of stupid things because they want to get money. When money is not the primary thing that their conviction is built around. And when your conviction is not built around money and you try to acquire money in that way, you fail. And you run into all sorts of problems. Okay? That's really what it is. So a natal chart synthesis allows you to examine what your true purpose is and how you are geared up to acquire it, so that you don't fall for the con that destroys people and destroys lives. So the things to guard against with the moon in Taurus is becoming overly conservative, refusing to take any type of risk, reinforcing bad situations, meaning once you have doubled down on a terrible situation, you continue to double down on it because you're obstinate, alright? Or problems with gluttony and hedonism, meaning an individual that cannot adjust their sense of self-worth they think they have to go to the extreme. Now, anyone who's abusing their sense of self-worth, what it simply means is that there is a vector inside them that is representative of that sense of self-worth. Normally, that vector is static. It points towards the thing you want the most. But when the sense of self-worth is in trouble, or, it's impaired, it's revolving all over the place. It doesn't settle down on one direction. It's here, there, and everywhere. And imagine a sphere. So if you have an arrow that points to any direction in the sphere, that's a door that is locked from every angle. A sword that turns in every direction. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, well,